Hey guys, welcome back to another video here. How's everyone doing here? I hope everyone is doing great here. In today's video, this is actually going to be like my final part of part three here of reviewing all of the histories of all the greatest philosophers here. Yeah, if you guys haven't seen last video here, we ended up at covering we went through from David Hume to all the way down to Friedrich Nietzsche here. In today's video, we're going to be going through Bertrand Russell, and then we go all the way down to David Lewis right here. This is all going to be my last video here. But if you guys think that there's maybe other philosophers here that you think I'm like basically missing out of the video or even that did not mention anything at all into this video here, then please comment down below of which of that philosopher here, and maybe I might cover him or so here, maybe in a future video here or so here. Yeah, so as like I said, like in my last two videos of this, I'm gonna be reading all through all of this here and discussing what they're famous for, their philosophical ideas here and such. So that's what we're going to be doing in this video. But before we gotta get into this video yet, if you guys have not yet, please be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to my channel if you're new. Don't forget to comment and turn on the bell notifications. That way you get notified by every video that I'll be posting in the channel. Anyways, let's just get right into the video. Alrighty, let's start off with Bertrand Russell here. Bertrand Russell from 1872 to 1970. Bertrand Russell is well known for his contributions to mathematical logic, and his role from founder of modern analytic philosophy in his work of the theory of logicalism, which was aimed to prove through the mathematics is reducible to logic. He is famous for his public activism, including the advocacy for his pacifism and social reform here, and he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in Literature in 1950. For one thing that Russell was basically famous for is his philosophy here, which is his teapot here specifically here, which is a philosophical argument that said that through the experiment by Bertrand Russell illustrating that the burden of proof lies within the person making the unfalsifiable claim, particularly in the argument about religion. Russell proposed that the claims that the tiny china teapot orbited the sun between the Earth and Mars. It could be unreasonable to expect anyone to believe him because they could not be disprove it here. The argument highlights the lack of evidence to disprove the claims does not necessitate the belief in it. So, in other words, that if you want to prove like the existence of God there, or in other words, to put this also in other words here, he tells you that there's like a floating teapot that is like basically orbiting the sun. It cannot be seen or detected here, but that they know that like it's already there here. But they don't have any false claims. You need to actually in order to prove the existence of God here, you need like actual evidence. Is what he's trying to basically claim here. And if you guys also don't know, I've also heard somewhere that Bertrand Russell was also basically a teacher of another philosopher, Ludwig Wittgenstein here, who I'm gonna be covering next in this video here. But a result on like basically ideas of modern philosophy here. But the result is that he was that it didn't go out very well for teaching, especially for Wittgenstein here as well here. That I watched like a biographics video about Ludwig Wittgenstein, who I'm gonna go to next. But let's just keep moving forward. All right. Next philosopher, we have Martin Heidegger from 1889 to 1976 here. So Martin Heidegger was a German philosopher who is known for also the works of existentialism and phenomenology here, focusing on the question of being and the nature of human existence, or Dasein as he referred to it. His philosophy argues that humans are beings in the world, inseparable from their environment and social context. In the critiques of modern thought for forgetting the fundamental meaning of existence itself in favor of a subject object and divide here. The key concepts include the distinction between the authentic and inauthentic existence, often characterized by the they self and the avoidance of the reality of death here. The question of being, which basically Heidegger's central aim was to re-examine the fundamental nature of being itself here, which he believes the most of Western philosophy had forgotten, treating as it a secondary concern after focusing on specific existing things. And also his famous word with the Dasein, which is to describe the human way of being, emphasizing what are fundamentally beings in the world, not separate subjects observing in the external world, but as an integrated part of it. So, in other words, like, he criticized also other existentialists, also philosophers, to also describe, like, what is someone's as their actual being, like being something as, like, a human being, or, like, being as a part of the world here, into part of the existence into, like, the external world here, in the existence of human nature. And his authenticity and inauthenticity, Heidegger argued that people would live in an inauthentic, fallen life in the anonymous they, das Man, he called it, avoiding the anxiety, the existence by conforming to social norms and distractions. The authentic existence, however, involves the confronting one's own finitude, and particularly the inevitability of death here, which pulls the individual out of they and the self and allows a more genuine way of being. Since this is why, like, he also kind of argues that people should live also in the more in the authentic, like, basically ways of life here, and should also people have the individual they self here, and just and how they needed to get a more good life in general here, and it's also the Sein versus Vergessenheit, the forgot or the forgetting of being. The term describes the history of Western philosophy, which Heidegger claimed had forgotten, and the ontological difference between being, Sein, or beings, das Seiende, as he called it, and the technology. In the later work, Heidegger analyzes the technology not as just a tool, but as a way to revealing or ordering the world, which he called enframing or Gastel, and he argued the modern technological ways of seeing the world reduces everything to a stock to resources for use there. And yeah, so, like, basically the overall statement here for the dust sign here is basically known as someone else's own self or someone else's own being here, or basically to know, like, what their human existence in terms of body features and and parts of human existence, and also how people should need to live authentically in just in every aspect parts of life in general here. All right, let's just move on to the next. All right, now we get to Ludwig Wittgenstein here. All right, so Ludwig Wittgenstein was a 20th century British Austrian philosopher whose work focuses on the philosophy of language, and his major split between his early and later thought. His earlier work, the Tacticus Logico Philosophicus, which he argued that the language of reality minored in each other through logic, famously stating, "What we cannot speak about, we admire each other thought through logic," famously stating, we what we cannot speak about, we must pass over the silence. His later philosophy rejected his view, prospering instead of the meaning of words here is determined by their use of different language games here and forms of life here, and the philosophy's role to clarify language to show many philosophical problems are actually just misunderstandings here. And yeah, and like his philosophy of language, like when I know that, like, is basically that language is he also, like, with Wittgenstein had also argued that also that language can be also sound, it can be used as some types of different types of like different games here, as well as used as different tools as so on here, and as way to people, how they communicate here. And it was also he rejected the idea of the words of having mythics fee meanings instead of the words meaning of use of the specific language game, which is a border the context of activity and social agreement. And his language games, he used the concept that shows language serves as many purposes just describing the world, such as giving one's orders, making jokes, or make forming hypotheses here. And and Ludwig Wittgenstein himself, at the first beginning, he also like basically questioned why do people always make conversation, or like basically what makes a conversation, and one of the main answers also bringing up many ideas that are big of topics that people like to just to talk about there, and whether it's if it's like a brain topic, like whether if it's just work, school, or just anything in life in general here, and our many meanings, or just the part of the basic and our ideas here. And he also asks that language is embedded in the human activities or forms of life, which are the frameworks of make language the society possible. Meaning is derived from the shared social context. And Wittgenstein saw philosophy as not as a system of doctrines, but as this activity of the aims of clarifying language and to solve the philosophical problems of that arise from the linguistic confusion. He argued that many philosophical puzzles are the result of taking language out of his language game context and treating it as if he had a single static meaning here. All right, let's move forward. All right, so now let's go to the next philosopher here. We're now going back to economics here, and we have Friedrich Hayek. He from 1899 to 1992 here. So he was part of the Austrian School of Economics here, and he believed in the free market capitalism here, kind of like similar to Adam Smith, who I covered in my last videos here of Edinburgh history of Edinburgh, and the I think the part two of this of the history related philosophy. But he also believed in free markets would allow creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship, which are necessary for societies to bloom and citizens to prosper. The free market capitalism is an economic system where private individuals and businesses and their own production driven by competition and supply/demand with a minimal government interference, or laissez-faire as we call it, to set prices, production, and distribution, fostering innovation but risking inequality and market failures. It prioritizes individuals of economic freedom, individual property rights, and voluntary exchange, relying on free market forces, not state control, to allocate resources. And the theory is spontaneous order. The Hayek's concept of the spontaneous order emphasizes the complex social systems, including economics, arise originally through the interactions of individuals without intentional design here. So he basically kind of says, like, he does agree with the idea of like the free market capitalism here, that he agrees that argues that it makes a lot more creativity, productivity, innovation, entrepreneurship, and like basically how people can like basically private individuals, and many businesses can make their own production, as well as making out many goods and products here that people buy or sell in the days here, and to big competition with supply and demand with only minimum government intervention here, and and also like setting up prices and distribution production to better products like pieces around the world, and fostering while like trying to preventing inequality, like economic equality and market failures here, and also increase like their markets, and as well as establishing trade with many other countries as well here. All right, let's keep going. All right, so now next philosopher we have is another Austrian British philosopher like Wittgenstein. This time we have Karl Popper here. So let's talk about Karl Popper. So his Karl Popper's philosophy centers on the critical rationalism, which he emphasized that knowledge grows through the conjecture and refutation, not verification, proposing the falsification as the key distinguishing science from pseudoscience. pseudoscience and the demarcation of problem, and advocating for an open society that embraces criticism and rejects the historicism and totalitarianism. He argued that the specific theories are always provisional and should be always actively tested for disproof, while in politics, he championed for the liberal democracy as the best system for social title self correction through the open debates and criticism. So so basically, gonna do, and my best word would be places to like all the another way words to like basically summarize Karl Popper's philosophy here, and like it's like I could also hear like for example here you see for let's say like for example here you kind of see like there's like two flamingos, right? They have the exact same color, or like but they're let's see like the one flamingo is like pink and where the other is black. These cannot be like basically distinct here. They're two different types of flamingos here, and from two different areas and two different key concepts of them here is probably the best one I could that I can best as I can summarize here. So, anyways, let's just keep going here. Okay. Now, next philosopher we have is Jean-Paul Sartre here from 1905 to 1980. All right, so Jean-Paul Sartre was born in Paris in 1905 here. But when Sartre was young, his father, who became a navy captain, he had died when he was like basically a baby here, and then he would eventually, and then like he was basically known like he was both popular in both Europe and the United States here, and he was known for his philosophy, which is also existentialism here, famously summarized as existence precedes essence here. And what Sartre meant by this is that you are born as a blank state, and your choices and actions are based on who you are here. Like basically Sartre is basically kind of stating like that people like basically can do whatever the activity they like here, that we're free here, and also like free to do your work or free to do your business, your job, school, and do your chores and all that kind of stuff here, and we radically free, but this freedom brings an anguish here, and or the angoisse here as he called in French, because people are responsible for creating their own choices and create meaning in a meaningless the world, that leading either of us authentically but by embracing freedom, or we live in bad faith here, as Sartre called it. In what it means to like to live in bad faith here is basically that like basically people will get shy, stress, and anxiety, and it's bad faith to like basically have a type of work here, or it's to meet up with a specific person here by pretending not having freedom while blaming outside forces of our choices. Sartre had also criticized over capitalism as an exploitive, dehumanizing system that constrained human freedom here, and fostered on bad faith by reducing individuals of the individual freedom. That's why he favored with existentialism with Marxism here, in order to have personal freedom and social liberation here. And like with that Marxist idea here, Sartre had like basically also in the 1960s had basically led into like many of the protests here in the May 1968 like protests here, alongside with his other philosopher Michel Foucault here, who I think I'm gonna be also covering next in this video here, and that he also was basically he was then later captured here, however here, and taken prison, and then the president of France here, Charles de Gaulle, had basically funnily enough said, "You don't arrest Voltaire here." And that's not until when Sartre had also basically met up with also Fidel Castro and Che Guevara and of Cuba here, and admired them both deeply here. And the FBI, and by that point, the FBI had basically tried to had kept on spies on like Sartre here for like basically for his own philosophy here, and so. And yeah, so like, and he's also like, yeah, that's what his philosophy is. Like, also that we're basically free here to make people's different aspects or actions or basically different choices here. All right, so let's go to the next here. Ah, oh, let me pause this. All right, so next philosopher we have is Joseph F. Fletcher here. So from 1905 to 1991 here. Joseph Francis Fletcher was an American professor who founded the theory of situational ethics in the 1960s. Fletcher was a pioneer in the field of bioethics, in the leading of the academic proponent of the potential benefits of the abortion and infanticide and euthanasia and the eugenics and cloning situation. He also was known for his but he was known for his famous theory, which is situation ethics here. Developed by Fletcher is a flexible context department in the moral theory, arguing in the most loving of action. So, like, follow agape, which is like the strong aspect of love here, is a specific to the situation, is the only absolute rule. It is also rejects legalism, or rigid laws, in favor of the pragmatic person centered on decisions, balancing personalism, positivism, and real relativism into determine the best outcome. In other words, like the real right is depends on the situation. In the situation ethics, we're wrong depend upon the situation. There was no universal rules on our rights, and the case is unique, and the diversity unique solution. Situation ethics also rejects prefabricated depictions of the perspective rules here. And here, let me actually edit something real quick. Oops, sorry about that. Just noticed something. There's a little weird C here. I don't know why. But okay. Yeah, so in other words, sorry about that. So like basically, in other words, and to put this in short here, you have to like situation ethics, like followed by basically agape, or like basically do your best with of like the best of the loving man here, and follow unique of like more Christian love, like Christ, and yeah, and do what is like what's your love and what's your personal like, regard that the thing in life or your hobbies or what is yeah and all that stuff here. So anyways, let's just go to the next one. All right, come on. All right, now next to another French philosopher, we have and now we have Simone de Beauvoir here. So let's talk about her. So Simone Beauvoir's philosophy is rooted also in existentialism here, emphasizing on radical freedom, responsibility, and the idea of existence precedes essence, because she also lives in the same time period, and she was also great good and partners also with Jean-Paul Sartre here, and but this time in the meaning we create our own meaning through choices and projects, not predetermined nature, famously applying to the feminism with one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. Her core concepts include achieving transcendence or self-creation over the immense stagnation slash persuasive roles, fighting into the imposed limitations, and developing an ethics where the freedom of others is essential for one's own. She critiqued that the societal constraints, especially on women here, argued that against sacrificing an individual freedom, abstract ideals, and advocating for also engage overcoming moral fault here. And also Simone de Beauvoir here, he also wrote down another book here that she wrote called The Second Sex in 1949 here, in which she also basically kind of argues that basically women should live their lives and they have their rights also the same as also kind of like with also with rights with man here as well here. And she also kind of describes also the bodies and nature also with the like in women's body, and as well as also how they should, and also how women also needs their freedom and also they also have liberty, same liberties as well as for men here. And and yeah, and like and also that she and that also the other part is also like and she also like also does the exist and proceed efforts to create their own meaning and make choices and also our responsibilities, kind of like similarity to Jean Paul Sartre. All right. Let's go to the next philosopher. All right, so now I have Romanian born philosopher Emil Corian here from 1911 to 1995. And he's the Romanian born philosopher and the essayist known for his extreme pessimism and nihilism here. So, like, from the philosophy influenced by the philosophers like Arthur Schopenhauer as well as Friedrich Nietzsche, and focusing on the suffering of decay and the absurdity of existence. Writing in both for Romanian and French, his aprehistoric, fragmented the work explores the inconvenience of being born, viewing life as a failed project and suicide as perhaps unnecessary relief. The philosophical pessimism, considered one of history's most pessimistic thinkers, he believed that existence is inherently flawed and suffering is meaningless. Yeah? And so like pain and suffering and like and like actual anxiety and stress and sadness is been kind of meaningless and like and also as well as also antinalitism, that he viewed that the catastrophe of the source of all misfortune, arguing that it could be better to be born. And the loser mentality, Corena suggests that the meaningless world, accepting one's status as a loser or a parasite, allows to want to escape the pressures of social striving. Suicide as relief. While he famously wrote that it is not worth to bother of killing your oneself, since you always kill yourself too late, he regarded the idea suicide as a constant comfort that makes life bearable. And his writing is noted in his poetic and aphoristic and often paradoxical style. So pretty sad stuff, and you're pretty sad and tragic stuff here that he says here. Um, but he kind of so like but he also kind of like basically like describes also people how they live their lives also with extreme pessimism and nihilism as the and like how people their lives are miserable, or like that there's no inherent value or any meaning in life here, that that we have to go on our own ways here, and sometimes that you don't achieve anything or you don't succeed anything, or there's nothing that's greater or good here, or you're perfect, or is this something that you can achieve or like ensure just in life in general here. And until then, like and also kind of thoughts of warnings also with like suicide and like one's also killing themselves. So pretty tragic stuff here. Let's just go keep going here. All right, so next philosopher we have the French Algerian philosopher Albert Camus here. So he is also a philosopher, but he's also an author and a playwright. But he's known for his philosophy of absurdism here. So, but even though he Albert Camus was also part of existentialism. However, he basically kind of declined on that movement and he went to absurdism. So he was born in poverty in Algeria in 1913. He overcome his challenging childhood to become a celebrated writer and a political activist. After contracting tuberculosis in his youth, he studied philosophy and worked as a journalist before moving to Paris to join the French resistance during World War II. And he was then awarded also the Nobel Peace Prize in 1957 here, and it was killed, but he was then later killed in a car crash in 1960. And like one of Albert Camus' favorite more famous works here can be books like The Myth of Sisyphus here, which is also I have a video about here from the Philosophy Vibe, where it tells the story about Sisyphus here, who gets interacted with the god here, but then like basically got angry with Ares here, I think with the god of war here, and that the gods angered Sisyphus that traveled into many universes and sort of balanced and also created a little some kind of chaos here and did some little crime here, and then until he was then received as a little punishment until he was then caught it up into this mountain right here where he had to like basically push forward that big giant stone of rock here up on top of the mountain here, and that would then later symbolize Albert Camus' absurdism here. And so his philosophy, and also he also wrote other books as well here. So on in The Stranger and the Plague were also his other books. Like The Plague also plays that book here where say like a group of like many rats here had spread disease that killed the entire population, that the whole city was basically quarantined. Or on The Stranger, where there was like basically one man here who was like basically on the beach here, and then he got talks up with the guy here, and then basically actually shoots him with a gun here, and then he then feels like basically the absurdity and like the existence and like the sadness and the grief and like basically the regret that he feels there. And so back to his philosophy. Although he labeled as an existentialist, he preferred the term absurdist here, and his philosophy centers on the conflict between the humanity's needs for meaning and the universe in a meaningless absent. And also, like, the absurd here, which basically it also originates from the philosophy of the Danish philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, who I mentioned in my part two of my last video of the greatest philosophers, where he basically tries to describe what is something that is the absurd here, and say for absurd that goes to Albert Camus here. He basically kind of argues that absurds basically needs to live like authentic life here, and like basically as well as also like people that the absurdists must basically also need to be to like rebel here and to rebellion kind of. And also the his absurdism is a philosophy which is centered on the conflict between humanity's search for the inherent meaning of the universe, apparent meaninglessness, and the posits of the existence of is irrational that attempts to find order in a chaotic world led to conflict. Instead of despair, absurdism encourages individuals to embrace this paradox and create their own meaning and purpose, and through the defiance, action, and personal rebellion against the meaninglessness. So yeah, like basically the in other short terms here is to like basically to be an absurd man and like basically try to find life that is like basically in a meaningless world here. All right, let's just move on. All right, so next other French philosopher, we have Michel Foucault here. So, Michel Foucault was also another French 20th century philosopher, but he's also a historian too, who he also show how power shapes individuals and society through institutions like prisons, schools, and hospitals here. His logic focus on power operates not just through force here, and through knowledge, and discourages the systems of discipline that control the behavior that creates norms. He used historical analysis to show that he considered normal or true. He is often product of the specific historical and social forces rather than the universal truths here. So like basically he kind of like basically criticized over like many of the capitalist states here, and like basically over like the way capitalism produced like law, states, courts, and psychiatrists here. And like Michel Foucault wants to establish like basically a world of anarchist Marxist utopia here. And he was also basically the symbol of like many colleges and universities here and the cornerstones of the world here. But like his background basically of Michel Foucault was very deeply, both of his parents basically were inherently rich here. Dr. Paul Foucault was basically what Michel hated about bourgeois France here, and he tried to like basically commit suicide and basically painted drawings of Goya here until he also tried to commit suicide again here, but he was then basically forced by his own father here, and he was basically forced into the institution of Paris and Versailles here, and then he was basically he was then basically married off with his boyfriend. That's right here, until he also basically moved into other cities like in Poland and Paris, Poland, and Germany here until he went with his lover here until he found also a book that was also from Friedrich Nietzsche here, the Business and Virtue of the Book of History here, which Nietzsche also that he sarcastically stochastic theory, and there's also about basically learning about the past, and he also argued also kind of like that learning the history is also pretty important here because that we don't make that we know that we don't make the same mistakes here, and to learn the past, understand and analyze the past, and how to make also like a better future here. But the power of knowledge that Foucault had argued that the power and knowledge had deeply connected. Institutions form knowledge, like criminology or assent to charity, and to export power over individuals to define who is normal versus who is deviant here. His discipline is a system of power uses the surveillance to control over time and space, the normalization to shape individuals, as a classic example of Panopticon and the prison design, where the inmates are constantly under the potential threat of being watched and leading to his self-regulate and their behavior. And also that Foucault hit all himself in 1965. He also basically wrote his most other famous book here by the time here, which he after he decided to become like both a philosophical historian here, which he called Madness and Civilization here, which he describes like some things that describes from the past, like say for example like in the Middle Ages, how medicine basically treats people very badly, as how medicine is not really good here compared to how now that that we have better medicine in the better days here, or like basically how laws and like basically law enforcement was kind, but it isn't that from the today here, and that's what Mr. Foucault had argued here. He was also the one who also led the 1968 protests here, also alongside with Jean-Paul Sartre, which by himself he was basically also a public activist and a public intellectual. And Michel Foucault's method of studying history involved tracing specific, often messy historical origins of current events and institutions rather than seeking continuous linear progression. And he looked into how power structures emerge and change over time. And this refers to the walkabout things, like the rules of assumptions embodied into conversation sources like madness, sexuality, or criminality that shape the knowledgeable, acceptable, and therefore what is considered real and true in a society. All right, let's keep going. All right, next philosopher, we have the 20th century Australian philosopher J.L. Mackie. So Mackie is held compatibilism about free will here, concerning about religion. He was well known for vigorously defending atheism, which and also arguing that the problem of evil was made untenable with the main monotheistic religions. His criticisms of the free will theodicity and particularly significant. Moral skeptic, and he was also more for his specific philosophy known as moral skepticism here. The moral skepticism, or otherwise they know it as the error theory, is the view that all moral claims are fundamentally false here because there are no objective moral facts or properties in the world to make them true, despite how they appear to be objective. It combines the cognitivism and with anti-realism. The key proponents with J.L. Mackie argue that our moral language treats values as real, objective features, but these queer properties don't exist here, making every moral judgment whether murder is wrong or charity is good is systematically mistaken. Or like given like another example, like say that car crashes are wrong, or like stealing is wrong here, is systematically mistaken here, like there's no objective true mean or true or like true objectives here, or like objective moral facts here. There are the examples we can think of here. Alright, so now let's move on to John Rawls here, going back to some political philosophy. So John Rawls, from 1921 to 2002, John Rawls, his theory is known for the justice of fairness, proposes the principle as just the society that derived from the hypothetical origin of a position behind the veil of ignorance, ensuring that particularly the making individuals unaware of their own social status, telling bonds or beliefs, though the experiment leads to two main principles. One, the equal basic liberties for all, and two, social economic inequalities must be benefited the least advantage, and and also that the difference principle and then to the attached to open positions as a fair opportunity. Rawls sought a fair social contract to dispute primary goods, aiming for cooperation over utilitarianism. So yeah, so like also like his justice and fairness. So, like, to basically means to allow people, like, say, freedom of speech, freedom of character, freedom of assembly, freedom of voting, as well as also many other people granting rights here, such as freedom of market capitalism, as well as free of market economy, and also that freedom of, like, basically, to grant all the different fairness and justices, and also liberties that people needed to be deserved there. All right, so let's keep going. All right, so now we have Robert Nozick here. So, Robert Nozick here, champions of the radical individualism and minimal government or libertarianism, arguing that the night watchman state protecting the rights, not just redistributing wealth, based on the entitlement theory of justice, where the holdings we acquire justly here challenge the partner just like roles. But the key idea is that moral side constrains the famous Wilt Chamberlain argument and the rejection of the utopian visions that sacrifice liberty as an imposed ideal, advocating instead for the framework for utopia where diverse individuals in pursuit of their own visions. So like basically, in other words, his entitlement of theory of justice here, where he is basically arguing that basically they allow like people to have an open established open market capitalism to basically access to just transfer and as well as also access to free trade as justly here, as well as also do your transfer and trade with also many other good products with people to create like a great open free market, and that way it should really benefit as well to the societies here. All right. Let's keep going here, and now finally we have the one I'm going to end off with is here we have David Lewis here from 1941 to 2001. So, David Lewis was a highly influential American philosopher for groundbreaking the work of metaphysics here, philosophy of language and logic, most famously for modal realism here, the theory that all possible worlds exist concretely in our own, and for the influential theories of counterfactuals and properties and causation shaping debates across nearly every field of analytic philosophy. So like basically to put this in like other words here, it's the idea that like basically there is an infinite amount of possible worlds whereby every possible outcome and solution makes. I know that it's really itself is mind blowing. It basically is what type of ontological statements have, and that it basically should actually be concrete worlds that like basically every possible outcome or every possible scenario makes out, and which each like possible truth and knowledge it basically and logic it attains there. And so like basically that basically some humans might see themselves, and that moral realism or the other again a possible worlds where every possible truth attains, yeah, and also where possible scenarios was and the truth obtains, and also that philosophers had tried to determine what the future of the people of what they might look like in another possible world here. And like say for example for me for example, like say I wanted to be like a history professor and like say to study and work in like in the Oxford University in England in another possible world here is a perfect example of this. And yeah, so that is basically about it here. That is actually it. This is actually my final part of the history of the greatest philosophers here. And I hope you enjoyed it here, and if you guys want to learn more about these philosophers that I've actually covered in this video here, I'll put the links in the description down below here. But this is all the time that I basically have for everyone, and what do you guys think? Which of these philosophers and philosophies did you find very interesting here? And please comment down in the section or ideas in the comments below. Are there any other philosophers or any philosophical ideas or anything that I basically missed out or that I should have like basically mentioned in this video here? Please share your comments and ideas down below in this video here. But that's basically about it here. I hope you guys basically enjoyed the video here, and if you guys did, and what are you waiting for? If you want to like basically you want to see more history content, or maybe do also, I'm thinking also maybe do a history combination with also with a philosophy playlist here. So if you guys are down for that here, or you want more content like that here, then what are you waiting for? Please be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to my channel if you're new. Don't forget to comment and turn on the bell notifications. That way you get notified by every video that I'll be posting in the channel. And yeah, so I'll see you guys in my next video. So, Mr. Aaron's out. Peace.